Bear Cub Productions team are about storytelling through animation. Our production team comprises of Bobby Chesters and Lewis Jordan, who bring their magical stories to life. The journey within the world of animation first began for Bobby and Lewis as children when they became interested in animation at primary school. The realm of animation for entertainment purposes inspires our team to conjure up a world through pictures.
Hi, my name is Bobby Chesters and I am the original creator for the project titled Hope. I am a 3D enthusiast and in this project I was responsible for the creation of the character rigs, animatic and some of the animation.
Hi, my name is Lewis Jordan and I'm the production manager and editor for this project. I'm skilled at editing sequences, armature building and 3D printing. In this project, I was responsible for documenting the animation, modeling some of the outdoor props, compositing the video clips together and also animating some of the scenes.
For the creation of this idea there was no big story behind it. I just woke up one day and the idea had popped into my head. Although it has changed from what the idea originally was though, because for the original draft of the idea the relationship was between a man and a bunny. But it was hard to create any conflict that would make the story interesting. That's when I started to search further, and that's when I landed on the idea of the relationship being between a man and a bear. This would allow us to create more conflict within our story, which would in turn make our story more interesting and would draw in a larger audience. With this idea, I also wanted to tell a more serious story about loneliness, and the reason for this being is I want a more open dialogue about mental health in our society, and especially in this pandemic where I feel like a lot more people are suffering from loneliness now than they were before it.
I added to the idea creation by sorting out Bobby's story plot holes. There was no reference to why Kyle was ignoring the bear cub, so I added to the character's backstory and came up with that Kyle's wife, Jenny, was killed by the mother of the bear cub, or a different fully grown bear, which is why Kyle has a mistrust of bears.
For this project, I worked on the big items for the storytelling. These were the house and the characters. For the aesthetic, I decided to go for a low poly one. The reason for this being is I have a limited skill set in modelling, so I want to create an aesthetic that I could keep consistent across the entire story. You can especially see this in the creation of the characters. I will first talk about the house. With this model, I was able to tell a whole story in itself. This is because this is where our main character lives and this is where the story is set. I did this by making most of the house empty so I could raise the feeling of loneliness. I also had photos of his wife scattered around the house to leave the audience wondering what happened to her before the reveal of the newspaper headline. For the character modelling and rigging, I was seriously challenged. The reason for this being is I'd only ever created characters on this level once before, but these characters were more complex because they needed to have the full capabilities of walking and grabbing objects, whereas my previous characters I'd only ever had to stand in one spot. For our main character Kyle, I went for a more basic design. This can be seen most prominently in the face where he has a lack of facial features. The reason for me doing this is I do not have the skill set to model and rig a full face. However, this also gave us the opportunity to tell our story mostly through body language. Also for Kyle, I spent a lot of time focusing on his hand rig. The reason for this being was it's the most complex part of my rig because I need to make sure the fingers bend properly to make sure they look like they're holding an object naturally. For the characters to actually hold the objects, I set up a very simple system of having nerve circles in the palm of the character's hands, which I would then parent to the wrists. I would then parent any object I needed to the nerve circle in the character's palm. This would allow the object to move with the rig instead of having to separately animate the character and the rig, which could cause some problems. For the main character rig, I used a mix of inverse kinematics and forward kinematics. The reason for me doing this is the easiest way I find it to animate, by having the hips and the feet controlled using inverse kinematics so you can move them freely, and having the arms and head be controlled using forward kinematics. The most difficult character to model and rig was the bear cub character. The reason for this being was this is the first time I had ever created a quadruped character that I needed to model and rig. So for the character I decided I would keep it simple. For the model I would only use cube shapes, but I would make sure to bring out the bear's most prominent features. And for the rig I would only use inverse kinematics, as this would be much easier way to pose the rig instead of using forward kinematics.
I contributed to the modelling by creating some outdoor environment props. These were trees, a garden bench, a campfire and flame, but the flames were removed for the final model. Jenny's gravestone, fences around the garden, and an axe for Kyle's hand. When modelling the trees, it was hard to create the types I wanted, as I tried two different tree shapes, but the problem was I couldn't find the necessary tools to finish those trees, so I gave up on them. I finally used pine and fir as they were easier tree types to model.
I was in charge of handling the animatic. This means that I would decide the angles of the shots and how long they would last for. This also left me with the responsibility of handling how the animation would flow as a whole. This was my first time setting up actual shots where I'd have to fully consider the camera angles, because before I would just place the camera from a side-on view or a front-on view without really thinking about it. But doing this project has allowed me to play with camera angles to consider which would be the best shot for the story. I put a lot of time and care into creating the perfect animatic. This can be shown through the many iterations that the animatic went through, with it getting better and better each time due to the feedback that we had received. The feedback that we would receive would vary. It would be small things like changing the amount of time spent on a shot, or big things like changing the camera angles, but each one of them would help me to tune the animatic to the best of my ability to help me tell the story the best way possible. When creating the animatic, I decided that I would also do all of the key poses and timings for the animation. The reason for me doing this is so that we could save time later on in the production process for lighting and rendering, because those would take up a good chunk of time. The animation scenes that I handled for the project were the larger scenes that included more camera angles and a lot more animation. For these scenes, I really wanted to push myself by making sure that the animation could tell emotions through the body language. I feel like the scenes that I produced for the animation were of a good standard to help get across the story that we are going for. I also think that the animation that I made is able to tell the emotions of the story very well through the body language. It really did help that I set the keyframes out during the animatic, because this helped the animation to flow smoothly and made sure that the animation fit creatively with the story, and wasn't just thought out there and then when creating it. Also, setting out the keyframes during the animatic helped us to create the same style of animation, so it would feel like there was one animator working on the project instead of actually two. However, there was a disadvantage to me setting up the keyframes during the animatic, and this was timing. I hadn't taken into account the timing for some of the scenes, which caused some of the animation to be faster than it should have been when it would have benefited to it being slower.
The scenes I was given to animate were Kyle walking down the stairs, walking alone into the forest, Kyle and the bear walking into the forest together, and walking back to the house together after a day of collecting logs. Then finally I animated the final scene of Kyle and the bear happily walking together. When I animated the scenes with the bear, it was difficult for me to do, as I've never done a quadruped animal walk before, so this made it more difficult to animate. Yet the animation of Kyle's walk was easier as I previously learned how to do biped animation last year. For this project, I was the editor of the animatic, the teaser trailer, the making of video, and the final animation. It's been stressful independently having this complex work, but I committed myself to getting it all edited on time. It was my executive decision to get a soundtrack developed for this animation, so Bobby Sauce, Carl Whittle, a music student, whom helped us with a sound score for this final animation.
In conclusion for this project, I feel like it went well, and I feel like we were able to create a really good animation. I also feel like I have learned a lot about the animation process from scratch. The first thing that I've learned was the importance of planning and going through the project repeatedly before going into the actual animation phase, and how much that can improve your project. Another thing that I've learned during this project is how to properly model and rig a quadruped, because before I had no experience with it, but now I have a basic understanding of how it works. I have also learned a lot about camera angles and how to present my story in a more engaging way for the audience to enjoy. However, I do feel like there are things that I need to improve, these being my communication and organizational skills. They just aren't at the best of their ability, but if I am to improve those, I feel like my production would improve massively. The part that I feel like I need to improve on in the production process is the timing of my animations. Right now they feel like they flow properly, but sometimes they feel too fast or too slow when doing certain movements.
A skill I have learnt whilst doing this project is using a blocked out previs animatic before going into the final animation stage, as blocking out the keyframes made it easier to let me connect the key poses together, making the movement linear for this animation. I have advanced my knowledge of the processes from beginning to end, and these skills have improved the project. I definitely seek out additional support when undertaking a project like this, as this would have enabled a group skill set to improve the overall running. I'd love to utilize the use of facial expressions in the characters. I'd also like to learn how to manipulate the posture of the character's body whilst their limbs moved.